reform the police, defund the police, disband the police. Since the Memorial Day death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, you've begun to hear these demands more and more, both on the news and in the streets. But what do these demands really mean? And if any or all of them are met, how will it impact you and your community? Welcome to part 2 of Police Reimagined. I'm Christopher Norris, the community contributors and engagement editor here at WHRY. Tonight, we continue our conversation about the future of public safety in our region. With demands to cut financial support to police departments, many want to know, where would the money go and how will it be used? We tackle those questions right now. This is Police Reimagined. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining me for this important conversation. Let's just jump right into it. Erika, I want to start with you. You've been a part of the defund the police conversation, the abolish ICE conversation for a while now. The Philadelphia City Council has approved the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2021, which includes a $33 million reduction in the police department's budget. From your perspective, is that a victory for the movement?
From my perspective, it's not a $33 million reduction. It's not cutting into their staff. It's not cutting into their equipment. It is essentially, we're not committing to your raise for the following year. And then they moved the crossing guards over under the managing director's office. So it's kind of the slick maneuvering of funding. So I would say the police have not gotten defunded yet, and we're waiting for that victory still.
So the follow-up, you're talking about the shell game. They're playing a shell game.
They're trying to trick us. So you got to pay close attention to anybody in politics, as my dad would call it, politricking. And so you just need to be careful to see, are you actually getting what you asked for? And I would say in this moment, we have not. All of the uproar in the streets have been about accountability, have been about there may not be any transforming of a police force, and that reforms, while they haven't worked, we could try that, but we need to start really investing in things that work in our communities to reduce violence, to not criminalize every behavior, to really attack mass incarceration.
Reverend Tyler, I'll jump to you. You're part of the Live Free campaign. You guys have also been on the ground doing this work for a couple of years. When you heard the headlines and saw the headlines, $33 million defunded, your initial reaction, I guess, was maybe some joy, and then as the conversation unfolded, there was some cynicism?
Well, like Erika, we've been kind of following it closely, and we're kind of privy to some things behind the scenes, just as, you know, all this information was flying. And the rumors that we heard actually came to pass. Flood, I lost money when I was a teenager on the 43 bus in Oakland. It was a game called Three Card Molly. And, it's just like the shell game with cards instead. And that's basically what happened. So Erika's exactly right. So $19 million, the increase that's taken off, so at least to their credit, they heard our demand and did not raise it, but that's not a cut. And, again, so they've not done anything but shifted money around. And I think it's just egregious that council would come out and even, frame a statement that says they cut something when they know that that is absolutely untrue. So at this point, what we need to see are some significant monies put on the table to try the other public safety measures that we've been talking about: anti-violence prevention, workforce development, put money in the hands of people in the neighborhoods who know how to stop murders beforehand, because Philly cops not only can't stop them, they can't even solve them.
Rev, I want to follow up. What's the number? What's the number? What's the right number that you want to hear? I mean, I've heard some people say they want that $120 million that Kenny's invested over 5 years. They want that money reduced back. Is that what you're calling for?
That's exactly right. At least $120 million for these measures. And then I think that, instead of an austerity budget, they need to find another $500 million to put into the city. This is not the time that you cut people off in America's poorest big city. This is when you need to double down on investing in people. I'm going to tell you, what we saw a few weeks ago, that's nothing compared to what could happen in the city if we don't take poverty seriously.
Hans, you guys at the Police Advisory Commission has also been a part of this conversation, but part of the conversation around the Police Advisory Commission is also their funding, and that it hasn't been enough. As we talk about defunding the police, are we also talking about defunding your agency?
Well, no, I mean, not right now, we're not. I think that when we're talking about defunding the police, we're talking about ensuring that oversight is strengthened, quite the opposite. Most of our work has highlighted that police are involved in activities that they should not be involved in. That's a defund the police conversation, and are not equipped to do certain things like deal with mental health concerns, respond to dangerous dogs, to respond to child abuse. So I think our work could further strengthen the policy work we do can further strengthen this argument. And on top of that, defunding the police could mean that we're no longer funding them to investigate themselves, which is a practice that has offended folks in this city and around the country for years. So, no, I would say quite the opposite, that defunding the police means funding oversight to analyze and to investigate.
And a quick follow-up, Hans, that 120 million that Rev Tyler says he'd like to see cut from the budget, is that reasonable?
Well, you know, I do think, I don't know if it's reasonable, but I do know that I do think that we can come up with a true number, right? We can look at the things we don't want police doing. They're numerous. And understanding what percentage of an officer's time is spent on that. We know we have those records. So we can really understand how many domestic violence calls that a police officer was dealing with in the course of a year, and how we can eliminate that burden. You know, as I've mentioned, we did a report recently on the police encountering canines and just highlighted that they're shooting a lot of dogs when they shouldn't even be encountering the dogs. We should have an agency. We do have an agency that's underfunded that should be responding to 911 calls when there's a dangerous dog. So taking that kind of analysis and expanding it to other areas that we don't want police involved in could give us a true number. It might be more than 120, frankly, if we did that.
Keir, I want to bring you into the conversation now. I want to get your response on what you heard, but I then also want to ask, when you think about that $120 million that's been spent over the last 5 years, do you feel like it's been worth it? Do you see a return on investment? And if so, what has it been?
Excellent question, Chris, and I'm glad you did ask that. What our office does is, as direct service providers, we see what comes in through policing and why. And so some of the things that we are doing is looking at areas that are creating this mass incarceration, but not giving us more public safety. And we're figuring out where can we use those resources to do a better job at doing the things that we really want for our communities. It is not in what that system has been doing, that policing. So what Hans says is, I honestly think when we do a deeper dive, and we actually are doing a deeper dive right now, looking at all the traffic stops, the reasons why, what it produces, does it even produce things that people would say, okay, I'm glad you stopped these people because this is what you were able to gain. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of things that are done every day that are not necessarily what communities want, but we have been led to believe that this is what we need to keep us safe. And I think no longer is that conversation going to be something that's going to be able to be hidden non-transparently. We're going to be able to use data. We're going to be able to use the analysis to understand how much police work actually goes into this and how much overtime they get for making these frivolous stops. And I believe you may come up with a number farther than what Reverend Tyler suggested of $120 million.
I'm going to go to Erika in 1 second, but Keir, I want to follow up, and I want to cite a study called Every 3 Seconds. It was published in 2019 by Vera.org. I want to get your reaction to those numbers that you're talking about. Police across the U.S. make a total of about 10.5 million arrests every single year, aggressively pursuing drug violations, which disproportionately affect Black people, and low-level offenses. About 80% of those arrests are for low-level crimes, and only 5% for crimes that involve violence. What's your reaction when you hear those kind of numbers? And is that a surprise to you? Is that some of the data that you always have access to?
That is our reality. And that's what we've been talking about for the past, at least since I've been here, for the past 5 years. How many of our criminal justice practices go to dealing with quality of life things versus things that are really plaguing the city of public safety? And how many of those quality of life things that come into our system create the opportunity for those people to be more desperate to now that they aren't safe for their communities? And I think that police mass incarceration and what it does to people on the back end is that paradigm is the wrong way to govern a city. We do not want to bring people into a system just to pay for it, to be adversely impacted. We want people to actually be able to thrive in their communities, not draw from them. So exactly what you just read is what we see every day. We spend a lot of our resources, and quite frankly, I'd rather not hire more lawyers just to deal with that. I'd rather work with communities to deal with that, because that's where you're going to get the true benefit.
Erika, what's your vision for public safety, and is there any role for police in it?
I mean, I have to be really honest and say that, like, my long-term vision for what this world looks like is that we don't have prisons, that we actually don't have a punitive system, but actually one that is restorative. And so for me, that looks like if something is happening, and maybe I'll be really transparent here, right? As a woman, And as a survivor, I have spent a lot of time really processing what it has meant for me to not go to the police as a rape victim. And all of the ways that many of women do not do that, because it is not a system that functions for us throughout the whole system. I would rather see a situation where people can be held accountable in a way that's restorative. And I also watched my uncle die in prison, who was my father's brother, right? And who also for 13 years languished in prison, and they had to rectify their relationship. The system never helped them do that. So I think there's a place where we need to start moving in that direction around really holding people accountable in ways that restores our world. And maybe in an ideal future, that's what we get. We get to a place where we actually don't need prisons, we don't need police.
So I just want to make sure I have you clear. You're talking long-term future of public safety, in your view, is a world without police.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think we're going there tomorrow.
So now, some people were saying that that's a radical position. Others saying it's not radical at all. But what do you say to those? And I asked this question last week to someone who was also about abolishing the police. What would you say to those who say that that's not just radical, but that it's also reckless to try and envision a world, particularly a city like Philadelphia, with no police, that it just can't function like that? You need some law and order.
I think that people need to have a vision for what is right and just in this world, and that as we're building less policing, we have to build the infrastructures that actually support people where they need it, right? And so that as we start to strengthen our communities, we are going to need less and less policing, and that is actually what we need to move to. I don't think it's radical. I think it's like right in par with all the values that I've been raised on.
Rev, I'm going to go to you in one sec, but Hans, I just want to get your reaction. When defunding the police is one thing, removing and lessening their presence on the street and in society is another thing. Where do you fall on that ideological spectrum?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. I used to work in juvenile justice, and so one of the issues for us there was that we have an addiction to a punitive response, right? And in this country, that's what we're looking for. We really want a punitive response to all behavior, even if we can explain it, and that's why I mentioned juvenile justice, because these are our kids, and we still wanted a punitive response to it. So I absolutely agree with Erika that building our values differently and focusing on what restitution means and what restorative measures could look like would really be a good direction to go in. However, I don't know that we could ever fully get rid of a police department. I think we can reimagine it. I think we can restructure it. I think we can direct them to do less punitive responses. But we'll need, for even the 1% of people that we can agree, or probably less than 1%, that are true dangers to other people, we'll need a police force. We'll need a police department for that. It could be much smaller. It could be reimagined. And I think that I agree with Erika a lot more than I disagree with her. But I don't know if I yet have the creative vision to see a society without a police force at all.
Rev Tyler, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to what you heard, and then also, what's the conversation that you're having with both your clergy colleagues and your more grassroots colleagues within the Live Free campaign? Are they on the defund the police, or are some also moving to further left and actually imagining a world without police?
Well, I think that, the vision for clergy would always be a world without police, a world without prisons, because you'd have a world that wouldn't need it, because the things that lead people to those places now would be eradicated, right? So I think you have to bring it back to this larger question about why people are doing the things that they are. Again, until we fix some of the fundamental, issues of fairness in this city, our mantra at Power and Live Free is we want a city of opportunity that works for all. Right now, Philadelphia is a city of opportunity that works for some, but not for all. And so, would we need police as much if we had a city where people were not food insecure, weren't worried about whether they'd keep their homes? My mom worked overtime every day, 6 days a week. We didn't see her. When we saw her, she was coming in and she fell out. And as a result, my younger brother and I got into all kind of trouble, gangs, drugs, all kind of things before, I was actually saved from the streets. And so I recognize in a lot of these young people, that there are all these other forces at work. And we think it's all about the police. That's only a symptom. And so we have to deal with the root causes. So like Erika, I'm hopeful that we can get to that day. I don't think you can just automatically shift from where we are and go there. And I just want to say one last thing, Flood. So, Erika, your story, first of all, it's just like, I don't even can't even imagine how you wrestle with those kind of things. But you remind me that when you talk about Black and brown folk and the police, it is an issue where we are the victims. The 1,200 shootings a year in Philadelphia, most are Black people, and then brown people, and a few white people. So nobody knows the side of violent crime like we do. I mean, we have thousands of people in the city with family stories. I don't know a Black person that doesn't have a story of someone and multiple people who've been shot and killed or shot and survived. I got tons of people like that in my own circle. So this is painful for us. We don't want to call the police, but again, this is the world that we live in. And so I just want to recognize the complexity here. It is not an easy conversation.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, Rev, because that's a great transition. Keir, I want to go to you and talk a little bit about this complexity. The criminal justice system is itself a system. It's an infrastructure. And if you remove the police, the lawyers, many who work for you, will also be impacted. When you think about not just defunding the police, but if this idea of a world without police becomes a reality, does that make your work? How does that impact your work?
Well, like everything, we need to transition to the social norms of the time. I mean, there'll always be a need for lawyers. To be honest with you, Chris, I would love for us to have less cases than we have. I would love for there to be less reasons to continue to hire more lawyers just to deal with things that we're trying to push back out into the community, because I think that's a waste of taxpayer dollars. I honestly do. That seem like I'm going against my own office, but I'm not. You know, if anybody who's in my position that sees the things that we're seeing, and we're not saying, I'd like to talk myself out of this job, doesn't mean I won't have another job doing something else in some other area that I can use my skill and expertise. But I never want to continue to be paid on the backs of people that are the most vulnerable, because that's what this system thrives on. The vulnerable people pay for this system and they don't get much out of it. The justice system alone is the only system I know that we spend billions of dollars on with lack of accountability. Very little accountability. When people come in back and forth at a high rate, we blame the people and not the system. If we have a system of correction and rehabilitation, why do I not feel safer? How's that working out for us? We have invested so much in these systems to the detriment of other things. And every time we talk about doing things that improve quality of your life, the only thing we hear is we can't afford that. Well, why? Because we're spending almost $1 billion, over $750 million on a police budget. Do what Reverend Tyler and Erika and Hans have said. These are to police communities that, one, are not more safe and are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So how is that helping us? And there are many people in these communities that work, taxes are collected from their checks, and it goes to these structures that are not giving them the return on their investment.
So let's get into the weeds really quickly. Let's see if we could do this. Let's start with you, Erika. Okay, so let's defund $120 million from the police department. Where do we put that money? Where does it go? Who gets it?
I mean, I think there's lots of things that you could be funding right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a crisis where people are about to hit a cliff on evictions, and rent is due, and food drives are happening all over the city. Even organizations that we're all close to and churches that we all know are providing food for people right now. I also think that there are really good programs that could be invested in. I think that we should be looking at diversion programs that keep people from being booked, that keep people from being charged for small crimes, petty thefts, things like that. I think that there are youth programs out there that could really get funded to keep our young people involved. And I think that there are great violence prevention programs. As Reverend Tyler had said, sometimes we need people on the streets to be able to prevent crime. We're the ones that know what's happening in our neighborhoods. Like, why aren't we getting supported to actually prevent that from happening? There's lots of places that money could go.
I'll ask the same question to you, Hans. Where would you see $120 million going? Any particular agencies or programs that need that type of funding more than the police?
Yeah, so if we take the argument that this funding is meant to increase safety and reduce violence, then I think I would just look at more evidence-based structures for that, right? So Erika appropriately mentioned violence reduction programs, and so those are some active ones, right, that can appropriately address or more effectively address street-level violence. But there's some passive ones as well, right? And we talk about those, but better schools, better after-school programs, better youth programs for our young people that we can possibly predict are likely to engage in behavior that we don't want them to, and better drug treatment for those who want it, to be very clear about that. So I think a lot of the programs that I think can passively and actively address some of the issues that we say police are meant to address. And that's to say nothing of the downstream issues, right? So Erika appropriately mentioned, things like if you can't pay your rent, how that affects so much other parts of your life. Or if as Mark mentioned, if you are working 3 jobs to feed your kids, how police involvement is then inevitable for those kids. Are other issues that are more upstream. But if we're talking about immediate responses to what police are doing, but still trying to meet that need, I would go to the program I mentioned.
Keir, you look like you wanted to jump in, and then I'll go to Rev.
I want to say something really quickly. When we talk about what do people want, let's just base that on a middle-class white male's dream. What would my life look like if I was a middle-class white male? How would policing affect me as I was a middle-class white male? How would my school district look like if I was a middle-class white male? So let's just start with that standard and then just say, how much would it cost to apply that to everyone? What would it take to apply that to everyone? And I guess we get away with this. Well, what do you want? What do you need? We want that American promise, right? That some people live and some people are still fighting to get. And so when we're talking about what can you fund, everything that doesn't go to that, everything, including parks, recs, pools, entrepreneurial classes, all of those things that give us goals, dreams, hopes, a future. I just say, give me the middle-class white male standard. I'll take it.
Oh, okay, Keir. Now, I have to just really quickly, I saw a conversation that was happening online, and they were talking about, when people talk about, well, what does it mean to live in a community without a lot of police? What does it mean to defund the police and not have them as a huge presence in your neighborhood? And someone said that already exists. It's called the suburbs.
Oh, Chestnut Hill. It's called Rittenhouse Square. I mean, it is. It's called Eastmont area, Westmont area. I don't know which one is the most ritziest but that's what it's called, and that's what it looks like.
Yeah, Rev Tyler, I want to give you a chance to answer that same question. Where should we put the money at, and respond to everything that you've heard?
Well, let me tell you, Keir just gave me a sermon for Sunday, so I'm good now. And whatever I was going to preach, it's gone now. That's my Father's Day message. Give me what middle-class white men have. Life is good then. Well, let me just say this. So a group of clergy around the city, multiple tables. So not just Power and Live Free, but Black clergy, Philadelphia, A.M.E. clergy, Baptist clergy, Kojic folk. We're all signing on the letter that we've been working on. We did a defund the police teach-in a couple of days ago to really kind of educate and bring clergy into the conversation and kind of take away that fear and anxiety of it. So I actually have a list. So everything everybody said, but I've got a dollar amount for everything. So $30 million into anti-violence training, our anti-violence programs, again, Human Relations Commission and other places. $10 million funds for the new independent oversight board. $8 million to expand co-responder program. Apparently right now, there's only one model program in the city. We want to build that out. $20 million to the resource behavioral crisis care. $18 million to establish a community triage center, $1.5 million to community assisted diversion, and $5 million to community public safety task force. Oh, and $27 million to invest in community anchors such as schools, libraries, rec centers, parks, affordable housing, and other things that make us safe. So I think if you do the math, that's $120 million.
It sounds like you've really given this some thought. What's going to be, last question to you, Rev, what's going to be the barrier to getting that done? Is it going to be the police union? Is it going to be bureaucracy? What is going to be the blockade to that?
Well, the FOP is certainly going to throw up as many roadblocks as they can, but listen, right now, just like the Death Star on Star Wars, where the force field is down for a moment, and we got to get in and get everything we can. Their old allies don't want to touch them. They are toxic. Even in the state, if you follow what's happening, the state is moving on Act 111 for the first time in probably an entire, 2 generations. So this is our moment right now. The biggest hurdle for us is going to be whether or not city council and the mayor will have the political courage to do what they need to do. The wind is behind their back. The people are with them, but they just have to have courage to know that they can step into this and just let history, judge your decisions. Don't worry about the next election. Do what is right in this moment. We need at least 9 of them to do that.
And I would ask you, Hans, if you've been privy to any of those conversations, but just a yes or no. You're closer to the bureaucracy than any of us because you're a member of the government. Do you believe that there exists the political courage in this moment?
I think there does. I think that our city leaders, on some level, recognize that this is a time that's unique, much as Mark just recognized, and they want to act. I do think that it takes a lot more imagination to understand what it would mean to actually shrink the police department, and that we've become so accustomed and addicted to having a police force that it might take a lot of explanation for those folks to move to that particular piece. But I think they do want to respond to the will of the people.
You're four of my favorite people in this city. We could talk all day, but that's all the time we have on this. I really appreciate it. Mark Kelly Tyler, Keir Bradford Gray, Erika Almiron, Hans Menos, thank you so much for joining me. Your contributions have been invaluable. This is another episode of Police Reimagined, the future of public safety. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching Police Reimagined. Email your comments and thoughts at talkback@whly.org. We'll be back next week with another episode. For WHLY, I'm Christopher Norris. Good night.